Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kirk Damon.
And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions that don't have any answers, with your host moving papers around here. Ben Siders, that's me, and the other guy is, as always, Kirk Damon.
That's Kirk, as in the Cats in the Enterprise.
We are intellectual property lawyers and certified geeks practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri. You can find me, Ben, on Twitter at Benjamin Siders. You can find Kirk at KirkDMN, and you can find this podcast at LGGPod. Also, check out our website, lggpodcast.com. This is our Book of Boba Fett review episode. We're kind of going off script. We were planning to just save all of our Star Wars content for the Star Wars holiday special at the end of the year, but we just did that.
And we can't do it. We like Star Wars too much.
There's too much to talk about, and by the time, if we wait until then, it'll be stale and nobody will care. So, also, this is interesting because Kirk and I have discussed this virtually not at all during any of these episodes, other than I guess we talked about one scene.
We talked about early Book of Boba Fett, and we've talked about a couple episodes in when we both happened to be seen at the same time. Part of what it is that we were never sort of at the same episode at the same time. I started off having seen a bunch more than Ben did, then he caught up and went past me, and I never got caught up again until the very end here.
So Kirk basically watches his usually the Monday after they come out, so you're delayed by about 4 or 5 days. And I was watching them even after that, and so I watched the first 4 episodes all together, and then caught up to Kirk, and then I started watching them on Wednesdays when they came out. But bottom line is, we've both now seen all of them. They are all now out, and boy, let's just start off. What a weirdly structured narrative.
I have to say, this is a weird show. Like, just in the way they did it, the way they structured the show, the methodology for what it was. I mean, literally, I guess 5/7 of the show is flashback. It's a very strangely organized Star Wars show. And I have to say, and I'm going to start on commentary.
We should do a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen it, we're going to get into some plot details.
And a lot in the last episode, so yes.
So if you haven't seen it, go see it, and then come back to this later when you're done. But we are going to spoil the crap out of this.
Yeah, so definitely if you've not seen Book of Boba Fett, stop now and do that, because we're going to talk a lot about it. And there are some major spoilers, especially in like the last couple episodes. Yeah. So it's something where I think, and it's hard not to talk about it because they're major things. So.
Let me ask you this. If you've seen it, the structure is the first 3-ish episodes are an intercut of flashbacks, beginning with Boba Fett in the Sarlacc pit, and then flash forwards to basically current time after the last season of The Mandalorian, kind of interspersed together. And then there's a 2-episode interlude that's basically The Mandalorian season 2.5, everybody's calling it. And then The Mandalorian is back for a final showdown in the last episode.
Well, but really, it's still just a Mandalorian episode in the last one.
It kind of feels like it.
I kind of did it. To me, it felt like we were starting out with a lot of flashback. Then we sort of got caught up, and then we switched to Mandalorian 2.5.
Yeah.
And my real comment with it is, and I think there's a meme running around in this, is when is Boba Fett starring in this show?
Yeah. I saw a funny meme that said, this week on Book of Boba Fett, there's a cameo by Boba Fett.
Exactly, which that was the one thing I thought was so weird about it. It's what I'll say in conjunction with it. So I felt, after episode 1, I was really concerned because I felt episode 1 did feel very disjointed.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think it's so let me ask you this, Kirk. There's 2 stories, right? There's the flashback to him coming out of the Sarlacc pit, having his armor stolen by Jawas, who we now really see why C-3PO thinks they're so disgusting and gross. They really are terrible. Like, they're just opportunistic scavengers. And so he has that, and we see him kind of being rehabilitated a little bit by the Tusken Raiders, who kind of enslave him, I guess, but then he wins them over.
Well, we know the thing with it I thought was interesting is the setup. Our one exposure to details of Tusken Raider society, well, 2 exposures, one of which is episode 3, and the relationship between Anakin Skywalker and the Tusken Raiders. Yep. The idea that, they had enslaved his mother. She was effectively being tortured, is sort of what they imply, at least in conjunction with it. And in many respects presenting the Tusken Raiders as being savages.
Yeah, barbaric.
Yeah. We then have the Mandalorian season 3 episodes, I guess, or season 2 episodes. I'm trying to think when exactly it falls in. With the Tusken Raiders being they're nomadic. They're seen as being barbaric because they don't necessarily fit within the bounds of sort of society in the mosses, which I guess is what you kind of call the cities now of Tatooine. But no, they're actually a very noble people.
Yeah.
And
maybe it differs from tribe to tribe, too, we're kind of seeing.
Yeah, we see that a little bit.
We dress differently and seem to be a different group than the ones we've seen before.
Yeah, and sort of the question of what really are they, the thing with it. And, obviously, in initial trilogy, the only thing we encountered them of is the idea of them, shooting once at Luke's land speeder, and not a lot of, sort of, they're just kind of there and being scary. Being the people out in the desert.
The classic faceless enemy to move the plot forward.
Yeah, they're not even really an enemy initially. Yeah. They're just kind of there.
Yeah.
We see them obviously attack,
sort of a big threat. We gotta watch out for the Sand people. They provide some boundaries for where the plot goes to help explain decisions people are making, but they're as I like to say, they're pawns on the chessboard of the story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we really encountered. So we had kind of these competing narratives. What I think is interesting is the first episode of Book of Boba Fett goes back to the Anakin presentation.
Yeah.
They're barbaric, they're savages, they're enslavers. I think that's one of the things you talk about, they sort of, hint at. You definitely see them, the idea that like him trying to escape and then, getting run down and beaten up. But at the kind of end, you start to get this idea that, like, no, maybe he's just being tested.
Yeah. It turns into Dances with Wolves, right? I've seen this joke before. I call it Dances with Tuskens. I've seen other phrasings of it, but everybody's kind of noticed it. It has that story arc.
Or to quote Robin Williams, dances with great difficulty.
Yes.
I think it was Robin Williams that made that joke initially. But yeah, it's one of those things where they definitely then get into the idea, and the reason I think the first one's also rough is because we're not used to the flashback methodology. They use a very particular methodology for flashback, which is when he's in the back of the tank, we are flashing back.
But the flashbacks are long. I mean, these are 40 to 1 hour long episodes, and over half of some of them is a flashback.
Yes.
Normally the flashback is sort of interspersed with current action to provide some context, but this is basically starting a back to tank, flashback for 35, 40 minutes, then we get just a tiny little bit of present-day plot. I thought that was odd and, like you said, disjointed. It kind of made the viewing experience really frenetic.
Yeah. The biggest problem I had with it, quite frankly, is, to me, it felt like we needed to, they wanted to do fan service and explain what happened to Boba Fett.
Yeah.
And to me, a little bit, and I liked the idea of, okay, he's got to get out of the Sarlacc, but that's 2 minutes, of him getting out of the Sarlacc and losing his armor, which, yes, we had to explain those things.
I'm also not 100% sure how he crawled through several meters of sand. I don't know if how that works. There's little things like that I was like, Jon Favreau is usually better at attention to those details.
Yeah.
And I felt like a lot of that fell by the wayside here. It inhibits your suspension of disbelief and makes the viewing experience more frustrating.
It also felt, quite frankly, like fan service. I mean, it really felt like, hey, we're just going to put this thing in here because we want him to escape. We want it to be kind of cool, but we're not going to really tell you what happened.
Everybody wants to know how he got out. Like, we don't know he got out. Everybody wants to know how. I wanted to be not that interesting.
Yeah, well, it was really not that big of a piece of it.
No.
But then you also have, he has a Gothy stick. That, when you encounter him in The Mandalorian. Okay, so he's associated with the Tusken Raiders. Let's get him associated with the Tusken Raiders. What I really got from the flashback is we are setting up his relationship with the Pikes.
Yeah.
That's really what we're trying to set up in conjunction with the...
And to explain the change in his character, because he was known for the no disintegrations, right?
Yeah.
So we were kind of led to believe he was sort of an amoral, bloodthirsty murderer. In fact, Cad Bane calls him that, and even makes fun of him for saying you've gotten soft in your old age. So I like that they acknowledge that there's a massive change in character, so that Tusken arc serves two purposes. Like you said, sets up the conflict with the Pikes, which is important to do. It also explains why he softened up a little bit.
Yeah, and really sort of the idea that there's been the tragedy in his life because of the attacks on the Tusken, the loss of his tribe of Tusken Raiders. We want to call them tribe, but whatever group we want to refer to them as.
Fair term,
and stuff. So I appreciated the fact of the flashback made sense. I think my biggest problem with it was, quite frankly, I would have preferred it to have not have been presented as a flashback.
I agree. We talked about this early on that I think it would have worked better if they had taken those elements, because it's probably about an episode or two worth of content, and just done like a single standalone bridge episode that was not part of the Book of Boba Fett, and just presented all of that all at once, or maybe like a webisode type thing, some other format to pull those pieces out of this story so we could just stay focused on the present.
Yeah. Quite frankly, I think they also could have done it where just the first 3 episodes of Book of Boba Fett started at the Sarlacc ended at what we consider the start of Book of Boba Fett, the sort of time of the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to put it is we're in time of the Mandalorian. And one of the things that really caught me, and we're going to talk about it in later episodes, to me it is very clear that there is now a distinct time period, which is the time of the Mandalorian,
Yes.
between episode 6 and episode 7,
Which it looks like it's several years after Return of the Jedi. I'm not sure
Yes.
clear exactly when, but I think in the last episode somebody had referenced a time frame on the order of less than 10 years,
Yes.
but probably around 4 or 5-ish.
I think we definitely have to have. I mean, we know he gets out of the Sarlacc right away, but we
Yeah.
obviously have to have multiple years with him with the Tusken Raiders. There's no way that kind of thing could have occurred in just a few months.
Yeah.
Of what we see in conjunction with his acceptance into that, and the idea of him aging as well, and that being potentially bad for him as well.
Yeah.
That the Sarlacc injured him and stuff like that. So I think we have at least the idea of it being a couple years there. The idea of, again, I think 4 to 5 years is a reasonable assertion.
Based on Luke's appearance, is sort of not too closer to Jedi than Force Awakens for sure.
Yeah, well, and definitely, things like that. So, yeah, I mean, we're obviously already dropping spoilers. I think
Yes.
Luke's appearance, there was a mention of Cad Bane, so stuff like that. So, yeah, I think we definitely have that kind of thing. And that was my take, is I'm like, why didn't we just start there? Like, why didn't we literally just start with the scene straight out of Return of the Jedi, because it's not like Disney doesn't own it, with Boba Fett splatting into the side of the Ark and sliding down into the Sarlacc pit.
And then the whole episode on him getting out of the Sarlacc.
Yeah.
And then, really, you could have done an entire first season of just him with the Tusken Raiders, because there were some really great pieces there. The train heist was great.
Yeah, the train heist was really cool. The other thing, as the follow-up, I really would have liked to have seen his vengeance on the biker gang have more depth to it.
Well, so now that we know that it wasn't really the biker gang, it makes a little more sense why that was sort of perfunctory. But really, it would have meant more to the character if, like you said, if that was a more exaggerated effort.
I think it was the biker gang. They just did it at somebody's behest.
Yeah.
I still think the biker gang actually did it.
It was done very perfunctory. He gets Slave 1. Actually, I guess it's not called that anymore. Or no, it is called that. They just don't put that on the package.
They never put it on the package of the toys anymore. He gets Slave 1.
Gets the ship back, and then blows them all up. And when you see the ship coming, I thought he was going to land and challenge them or something.
Yeah.
But no, he just kind of strafes by, and that's that.
And they're all dead, yeah.
Yeah, they're all dead. Okay, well, all right.
To me, you really had this idea, and part of it is it's, okay, we're going to have Boba Fett enact vengeance, except he doesn't. It's just I'm just going to go
very
kill these
impersonal
people.
for a guy that's a bounty hunter.
And that's, for somebody who's known for, disintegrations. And so, it was that kind of thing where it's, okay, you get the idea that he's softening and things like that. But this was not... he never even gave them a chance to explain themselves. They didn't give him...
No.
He could have done why did you do this? And they could have advanced the plot.
It's more traditional, confrontation with an opponent where he lands the ship, they stop, he walks out, there's dramatic music, and they have a little conversation. Maybe he learns some more information, maybe they deny it, maybe they like their tough guy image and they don't deny it, but there's zero plot advancement. It was just okay, he's going to go blow them all up now, and then we're moving on to the next thing. It was very
we're on to the next thing. Yeah, and stuff like that. So those are the things with it. The one thing we definitely did get in conjunction with the flashback is his relationship to his cohort.
Yes.
And then why is her name escaping me right now?
Fennec Shand?
Fennec Shand, yeah. And so that's
so I think we're made to assume it was Boba Fett, right, in The Mandalorian.
Yes, you were obviously made to assume that, with it.
I forgot about that scene. That we didn't know who she found that saved her. Now we do know. So I do like that. It's clear to me now that at least Mandalorian season 2 and this were being developed at the same time, because there's a lot of crossover back and forth. And this is Disney trying to Marvel Universe everything. But although this is done better than they did with the movies, it still feels a little sloppy.
This one does feel sloppy, and I think that's my biggest complaint with it. Is I think, and it's hard because Boba Fett is the fan favorite non-name character from all of Star Wars.
I think we're seeing the limitations here. So if you've been listening to the Rewind episode I just put out last week, it was our culture episode. I'd forgotten I said this, but when we did our culture episode in season 1, they had just announced that Disney had just announced that they were, or not announced, but it was rumored that they were going to not do the Kenobi movie. They were not going to do the Boba Fett standalone movie. And I said, well, perhaps foolishly, I don't think there's not enough there with Boba Fett to do an entire series out of it. Well, they did. They made it work. But did they? Maybe we're seeing the limitations of his character here.
Yeah, I think we saw the limitations of his character. Well, they needed to make him a new character as to what it was. And quite frankly, setting him up as essentially a mafia crime lord type of character on Tatooine, replacing Jabba, is a great idea for what he becomes.
And they kept introducing things that kind of went nowhere. So they brought in Jabba's siblings, his twins. Sort of established the pomp and sort of the cultural norms of how the crime families work in Mos Espa. And then they were brought in, and there was a confrontation, and then they came back and said, never mind, we want no part of this, and they just disappeared from the plot.
Yeah.
How bizarre.
Yeah, again, and I actually have to admit, like, one of the things I really loved about the presentation of sort of Jabba's siblings is playing into, we talked about, some of the anime episodes and Visions and stuff like that. The Hutts are not a nice family in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's the Sopranos.
Slugs. I mean, sometimes they're worse than the Sopranos. I mean, but I thought that was a nice thing to sort of do, is to portray them as like, okay, these guys are just evil, like in the way they're portrayed. You have crime lords. You have the crime lord's portrayal of the idea of like the crime lord who's kind of the honorable crime lord, the honor amongst thieves type of person, or at least the idea, the way they've done it in Tatooine, of like Jabba maintained order in a very lawless society. Just he had to be a bit of a tyrant.
Sheer brutality, yeah.
But at the same time, there was a value to it, and that's portrayed a lot in organized crime and in crime lords, especially in science fiction. Of there can be organization in organized crime that can actually assist an otherwise lawless society. They create a law of their own. I mean, it's universal. We talk about thieves guilds and Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you have that kind of stuff with it. And honor amongst thieves. So you have those. That was a good element, and also it completely fits Boba Fett's character of the idea of him becoming a crime lord.
It does. It kind of makes sense. You can see him after he gets out of the Sarlacc and realizes Jabba's dead and gone, being bitter and angry about his fate and what happened to him, and particularly the way that it went down. Like Han Solo just accidentally whacks his jetpack, and I guess there's no safety switch on it because it takes off. So there's narrative elements there that make sense and build his character. At the end of the day, I guess I found both the Tusken arc and the Crime Lord arc by themselves to be interesting. I'd even go so far as to say compelling, and overall well done, but intermixing the two I thought did not work.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest thing for it to me, and I had the same kind of thing. I felt the way they organized the show structurally in the first episodes with the flashbacks, while it was clear what was going on, it was not an easy to follow story or a particularly interesting story because it kept flipping back and forth.
Yeah. Both would have been stronger if they were presented in more traditional linear fashion.
Yeah. So I think that was the thing that we had, for it. So, and I think it would have made more sense to not have done it as a flashback, to have just had it be, this is the plot line as to how it follows. Yep. The second example is like the fact that, he takes, he uses the droid, the droid fixers, at the early part to help Fennec Shan, but then like they don't remember him. Later on. And it's kind of like, wait, like they're all the ones who were in the shop when he shows up. Like, none of them remember him, and obviously it was because of the timeline of the way that occurred in the show that they couldn't let on that. But at the same time, it was one of those things where it's like, if you were to have done it in chronological order, that wouldn't have been a problem. It could have been like, hey, I remember you. Didn't you bring somebody in? Yeah, that was me. Do you guys want a job? Oh, sure, why not? Something like their relationship works better.
Yeah.
Like, that was the thing I had with it. Because, I have to admit, quite frankly, I find that concept, and quite frankly, that biker gang, well, I think their bikes are dumb.
Yeah.
The speeder bikes.
The Power Ranger bikes.
The Power Ranger bikes. I actually really kind of think they could be a very interesting characters in and of themselves. This idea of the android, the kind of people who want to see the advantages of droids and kind of want to be droids, knowing that droids are really kind of a low class in Star Wars. That's the way they've always been portrayed. That can be really interesting.
Speaking of which, let's talk about some of the cameos of other characters and some of the new. Let's start with new characters. What was your favorite new character they introduced in the series?
New character they introduced, the Rancor.
Oh yeah,
is that fair? Can I say that's my character? The Rancor and the Rancor Keeper. Because what I actually really loved about the idea with the Rancor is you have the scene in Return of the Jedi when the Rancor dies, where the Rancor Keeper pushes Luke out of the way and runs to the Rancor, and the idea of it being a pet, it's not just a mindless monster. And I really loved the fact that they went with these are creatures that
they bond with people,
deeply bonding. Yes, they're ferocious. They're just, they're things like that. But the idea of it being like, this is more a companion than a pet.
Yeah.
And it's something that explored a little bit in some of the animated series of the idea of the Rancor being more than it was.
I love the throwaway line too, where Boba Fett says he's going to ride it because he's ridden something bigger before, which I think is a callback to the holiday special.
I think at least I saw it that way. That was a reference back to the holiday special.
He's riding some
He's riding a dinosaur. But it was one of those things where I liked that. I loved the idea of the portrayal of it, and it's one of those things where, quite frankly, I thought that was a just really nice Star Warsy scene.
You know what I loved about that? So the scene with Luke in Return of the Jedi, so you guys don't remember, Luke kills the Rancor by dropping a giant metal door on its head.
Yeah.
And the Rancor keeper comes down and is like crying and being comforted by his friend like his dog died.
Yeah.
This scene is just a throwaway scene that's played for laughs. Like, there's no depth to it, right?
Yeah.
Other than just a little humor value to kind of release the tension after a dramatic, fight scene. But then by introducing this concept now, they add more depth to that scene. We talked about it in our last Skywalker review. How do they introduce new elements to the plot that make old elements mean more or change our understanding of them?
Yeah.
This is an example of how you do that with careful, clever writing, which moves the story forward, accomplishes world building, and puts a little more spin, a little more nuance into that other scene.
It also, quite frankly, makes Jabba more brutal.
Yeah.
Because now you really get the fact that, Jabba's horrible.
Yeah.
He's
basically keeping pit dogs,
Yeah, he basically has, he's keeping this guy's, trusted companion as a fighting dog for his own entertainment. And it was like, okay, that, you really get this idea that, people worked for Jabba not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And the Gamorrean guards presented the same way, the idea of the loyalty to the person that they're working for, the crime lord they're working for, and Boba Fett saying, no, I'm not going to kill him. You were loyal to the past two, might as well be loyal to me.
Yeah.
And they are. They're, brutally loyal to him in protecting him. And so I thought they did a good job with that kind of stuff with it, of really portraying Boba Fett is not Jabba, who is just brutal, and is not Bib Fortuna, who is just incompetent.
I'll tell you who I thought I enjoyed every minute he was on the screen was the Major Domo.
Because he's that hilarious.
He was such an over-the-top, ridiculous, scenery-chewing character. Like every time he was on the screen, I started grinning because he's like, I love the last scene where he walks out to read a Boba Fett surrender terms. I knew it was going to be something like a middle finger or something like that to these guys. But I don't know what actor portrays him, but he was perfectly cast, and all of his scenes, again, apologies and trying to play the diplomacy angle when the guy's really stuck in hopeless situations. I know a lot of people found him to be annoying, but I just thought that character was just a ton of fun in a series that didn't have a lot of fun in it.
He was definitely a big comic relief, is what it is. I have to admit, I actually liked the mayor, and I liked the mayor in a particular reason. And the reason I liked it is the first time you encounter him in his chambers when Boba Fett walks in and stuff like that. I love the fact that his language, then being instantly translated, his language is utterly foreign.
Yeah, and you see that in episode 4. There's one of those, I forget what they're called. Illithid? No, that's from
People always call them
hammerheads. Yeah, the hammerhead. They have a name, but they have two mouths and they speak in like a stereo language, and you hear some of the language in episode 4, and so they have that here, and it's just like a series of like grunts and weird sounds.
Yeah.
So they have the translator so you can understand it.
And it's actually hard to listen to, though. Like, when you hear the double things over on top of it, it's very hard to listen to. And I actually really liked the idea of, as a human being, these people would be difficult to talk to, not because of the fact of anything, but just because the whole way they communicate and who they are, their vocalization is foreign to us in a very, very foreign way. I actually really liked that. I thought that was kind of cool, quite frankly.
Ithorian. I just looked it up. They're called the Ithorians. So there's one of those in 4 also. I also really enjoyed the new Wookiee character they introduced.
I sort of did, but I don't think they give him enough depth.
No, I agree. I like the idea of a sort of mercenary Wookiee being used as a muscle. We haven't really seen like an evil Wookiee before, and that he kind of joins the other side. And I wanted more of that character.
Yep. I'm going to tell you the one that I also had. It's not outside the Rancor as to what it was, but my kids commented, and I have to agree with them. I really, really hope the bar owner survived.
Oh, the
woman who ran the bar, the Twi'lek who ran the bar, and her two helpers, the clean your helmet people.
Yes.
But my kids coming about and were like, they were cool. I hope they survived. And I'm the same way. I'm kind of like, that was kind of a fun locale. I hope they keep it.
Well, I like that. So one thing I will say this series did, I thought really well, a lot of well done, subtle world building.
Yes.
Where without shoving it down your throat the way that we've seen before in shows like this. Little things like, can we polish your helmet for you? Which at first I thought was code for something else.
Yeah, so did I.
But no, they bring back the helmet full of cash. And I'm like, okay, well, that's funny. Like, it's funny, it's clever. They're not even hiding it. It's like, here's your helmet full of credits.
Yeah, except they are hiding it. That's the whole point. It's an open secret. Yeah. That's what it is.
Which fits with the whole, crime lord, lawlessness of Tatooine. So a lot of little touches like that in the way that they tell the story.
And the Pike's not understanding it.
Yeah.
Which I think was also a very valuable sort of piece.
Yeah. I like that they established that the city is divided into these little quarters with different crime families. None of them got a whole lot of development. Maybe this whole thing just needed more time.
Yeah, so I was saying about the idea of are we going to see, and I kind of spent the joke of the Mandalorian time period, are we going to see The Mandalorian? Are we going to see Book of Boba Fett? Are we going to potentially see the Ahsoka Tano standalone episode blending into one series, which is The Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Because to me, that's what this felt like. To me, it felt like, and I'll use the comic book analogy, you have the main comic book storyline, and then you have the one-shot, four-issue miniseries to explain things off the side. Hey, The Mandalorian's the timeline, the Book of Boba Fett's the 7-issue arc off on the side. Now we're going to have the short Ahsoka Tano issue arc off on the side. I'm wondering, again, you're talking about comedies of the Marvelization of everything. Is that what we're going to see, with this? Is we're going to see something where we're really playing around with it? Because to me, that's what this felt like, that there is going to become one definitive, so to speak, TV show or serialized presentation of whatever it is in this window between Return of the Jedi, and Episode 7. And that now is going to be The Mandalorian, but we're going to pull other stories in. We may have slight divergences as to whatever it is, but that's really The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is the central character of that, and that's what we're going to see. Because again, to me, that's what this felt like we were going.
I think that's definitely what they want to do with it.
Yeah.
So let's shift off of the Boba Fett part of the Boba Fett story, and let's go to episodes 5 and 6, which has been jokingly referred to online as The Mandalorian Season 2.5.
Because it is. It's The Mandalorian. It's not the Book of Boba Fett.
So Boba Fett does not appear at all in Episode 5. It's just The Mandalorian in some really stunning and impressive imagery. I thought it was one of the better episodes of the season. And then the one after that is, I think, a little more uneven, and it has Luke and Grogu back in it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the first one. It opens up with the Mandalorian going into basically a butcher shop to collect a bounty, and then drawing the Darksaber and fighting everybody.
Am I the only one who thought that reminded them of Rocky? And then maybe it's just me, but it was one of those things. I'm like, this reminded me of Rocky.
It's because there's meat hanging everywhere.
Exactly, there's meat hanging, and there was going to be a fight scene in it. Even though it wasn't him beating on the meat, but okay.
They broke down the Beskar spear, which is interesting. And then we had a little more lore.
That has to have been hard for him to act with it on his back. It's really freaking long.
Yeah. I wonder if that was more of a practical thing.
Yeah, I actually wondered if it was a practical thing.
And then we got a little more world building on the background of the Mandalorians that were introduced to the Creed. I don't know if we'd gotten much on the Creed before.
Yeah. No, part of this is, and again, from your thing, we're tying into Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And the stuff we know from the Mandalorian and Clone Wars, we got a little more tie.
Which I haven't seen yet, so Kirk knows things I don't.
We saw a little more tie, I think, of the end of the Clone Wars, where we know we have the Mandalorians on the moon that follow the Creed versus the Mandalorians on the planet, which are sort of merged with the Republic and are becoming more a standard, sort of, what it is, thing with it. And what I thought was very interesting from it is the portrayal, because obviously we had the Moon Mandalorians or the Creed Mandalorians as sort of being the survivors from this. I thought the interesting idea of, we know that the Empire, clearly the Empire bombs Mandalore. We see TIE bombers come in and do that, which was also kind of cool to see TIE bombers really do what TIE bombers are supposed to do, because we never really seen that on screen. But the idea that, hey, the Mandalorians we see of that group now are very bitter because they saw the idea of Mandalore being destroyed because Mandalore essentially tried to not be as martial, to calm down. And this Mandalorian not quite living by what they think is appropriate, where he has kind of his own honor code, and his own honor code being even more extreme in some respects.
Well, then to be able to, I forget the context of it, but he has to redeem himself in some fashion.
Yeah, he has to go and wash himself in some waters in Mandalore, and that's the comment of, aren't they destroyed? And she's kind of like, well, too bad.
It says what it says.
Yeah.
So I guess we're getting a preview of what Mandalorian Season 3 is going to be about, is him trying to get this cleansing or whatever it is done.
Whatever it is with it. I also think I thought it was very good as the way they did it, and quite frankly, I think the actor did a good job as well, of does he lie about that? And him choosing not to, knowing what the implication is, and her very rapid response to it, But it's clear, even from the way he responds, of does he lie, that there's the possibility of her knowing he may lie and choosing not to. And so I thought that was a very intriguing concept behind it.
I also like the space station they were on, the ring-shaped
the ring-shaped space station where they're on the inside, which is kind of a neat sort of thing. My real thing from that, I thought we also had to obviously have the showdown between the two of them.
Yep.
I also liked the idea of the Darksaber kind of being this difficult-to-wield weapon.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to really know how to use it very well. It doesn't seem to be as easy as a lightsaber.
Yeah, and you really see him, like, he's almost dragging it. He can't lift it. She comments about it being heavy.
Yeah.
Of the idea that, the Darksaber is not a Jedi weapon, and so maybe there's something with the idea that it bears responsibility and things like that. So, again, we're going to see where that's going to go, I think, going forward from it. I think we're gonna see some showdowns in Mandalorian history here. I'm also hoping we see a little more of what did happen to Mandalore. I think the idea of, this planet was just annihilated by the Empire. Something we had seen in Bad Batch in the destruction of the cloning world, Kamino, that now we see, the Empire just is not a nice thing to be involved.
No, they're cleaning up some loose ends, aren't they?
and I liked the idea of doing that and sort of really pointing out the fact that, the Empire resolves its disputes through just brutal force.
Yeah.
And that was a nice, I think, addition in there, too. So that was my thing with it. My real thing I thought was interesting is how much they focused on building the Naboo starfighter.
Yeah, that was a lengthy sequence, and I couldn't tell if we were supposed to recognize. There was a lot of prequel imagery reintroduced here. We got the Naboo starfighter, the Scorponic or whatever droids at the end, a lot of prequel stuff, and that seemed to be a conscious choice. Which is odd, considering that all that stuff you would think would have been largely eradicated, within the continuity of the story. So why do you think they're bringing all that stuff back?
The one other thing I thought was interesting, just to talk about bringing stuff back in, them explaining what the long tube is that they attempt to use in Star Wars to stop the trash compactor, which I thought was hilarious. But one of the things I think that what they're trying to do with it is they are trying to portray... They want Naboo, I think, to have a more important place in history.
See, that's what I wonder, is if in Mandalorian Season 3 we're going to revisit some prequel destinations, Naboo being one of them.
I have the feeling Naboo is being set up for something. And quite frankly, I can very well believe that it's going to be a desolation of a planet.
Yeah.
It may also be that it's somehow held out. You may have something along those lines that's somehow held out. But my take of this is I think we're going to see something coming out of Naboo. The reason I say the idea of a desolation of the planet is the idea that the starfighter is rare. It is kind of like a sports car. I refer to it as, to me, it totally feels like it's the old Corvette. Like
it's presented that way, like a low seat, high engine. Like a lot of the camera angles they choose, like invoke the feeling of a muscle car.
Yeah, and a classic American muscle car, like again a Corvette, really being.
Yeah, Corvette is exactly what I thought. Just the shape of the hood. I don't know what it was, but
it's
got that
window
flat,
Corvette.
broad hood. Yeah, like a Stingray or something.
And so that kind of being the thing as to what it is with it. But I thought it was very interesting they took so long to sort of fix up the car. Now it did also give us some more insight into the Jawas, which I thought was useful. And it was the one play into the Pikes. Where you have the Jawas stealing that particularly long tube invention off of the underside of a Pike vehicle. What I thought was the thing that I had with it, I was joking about, I think I may have even said this to you at one point in time, is to me that episode feels like Star Wars Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, where are we going with this? It's also interesting because, the Razor Crest is a relatively large starfighter. This is a one-man starfighter.
Yeah, the Razor Crest is more of it kind of got the impression it was a
freighter almost.
Yeah, it was the Dodge
Falcon.
Caravan of its universe,
It's like the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
The other things I really liked with it, I did like some of the subtle world building that was done in conjunction with this. The Mandalorian being on what is effectively a public bus.
Yeah.
And the idea of
flights.
what do you do with your checked weapons, and stuff like that they arrive. You have this droid that just kind of hangs out with it. You really kind of wonder, are these going to get lost? Like that was
That's what I thought was going to happen. Like he's going to put the Darksaber in her, and I thought it's going to get stolen. We have a whole plot element around that, but no, he picked it back up when he got there.
Yeah, and so I liked again sort of that subtle world building that they had with these things. The also real presentation, and I thought this was one of the takes I really had from me as a piece of subtle world building. I think was intentional around this. Tatooine is really, really out there.
Yeah, I mean, you really get the impression of how off the beaten path it is.
Yeah, and just, you get that Western, old school...
Very Western
feel behind Tatooine that just none of these things... you see, the thing feels like a freaking Wells Fargo coach coming into town.
Well, it's got the trains. It's got people, getting shot out of windows and falling onto awnings, and we even had a speeder bike or a speeder race that ended with a fruit cart collision. Of course, there's always a fruit cart everywhere, even in the desolate desert planet.
But even the thing with when you have the speeder bikes and Boba Fett hunting down the speeder bike gang has that feeling of like charging horses, across the desert. I really got this idea of, to me, it felt like they want Tatooine to be a Western. They're going back to George Lucas's This is a Western in Space.
Yeah.
Tatooine is a Wild West movie town. It's not a real Wild West town. It's a Wild West in the movies town.
And we saw a lot of showdowns in the street, perhaps none more compelling than Cad Bane versus...
And we're getting, it's in the last episode.
Cade Vanth.
As to what it is, Cad Bane. We brought back Cad Bane.
When I saw the way they shot that, you could see the outfit, and it looked like his outfit. But I was thinking, how are they going to do like a real life live action Cad Bane? But I think they pulled it off really well.
They pulled it off quite well. The only complaint I had with it is they did a lot of sound for his breathing, which I didn't think was really necessary. I mean, yes, because he has the sort of tubes on the side of his face, but that kind of thing. My understanding is it is the same voice actor.
Is it? Okay.
Who did the Cad Bane in the animated
It's
series.
almost a shame he died, because that character was just... I mean, I wasn't rooting for him, but I loved every second he was on the screen.
What I like about Cad Bane, and I think the thing that I had for Cad Bane is he was a nice sort of brutal re-edition to be the foil to what Boba Fett is now.
Yeah, sort of a reflection of his past.
Yeah. And what the bounty hunters are, and the bounty hunters are still mean. And we've had this idea, sort of the redemption of the bounty hunter. We're seeing it with the Mandalorian now.
Yeah.
We're seeing it with Boba Fett, and getting into this idea of also what does it mean to be a Mandalorian. And I think, again, the one thing I put with this, I think everybody wanted to know Boba Fett's story because they liked Boba Fett as a character. What I have to wonder is if Jon Favreau, in looking at this, he wanted to tell the story fans want about Boba Fett, but it couldn't be about Boba Fett.
Yeah, like the story you probably want to tell was really more like pre-Empire Strikes Back. Back when he was more brutal, and the disintegrations. Like that's the context the fans wanted. That's why he was interesting.
Yeah,
people wanted to know where that line came from. We get this one remark from Vader with literally a stern finger shaking. Like, all right, well then who is this guy? Like even Vader's like, all right, now listen.
Well, I think part of it also, quite frankly, is I need an actual body to verify he's dead.
Yeah.
That was we're not trusting you anymore. The thing I had.
There's like a backstory there with Vader and Boba Fett. It seems like
the thing, quite frankly, I had from it is we happen to be watching the Lion King, the live action animated version. But one of the things they have with that is the great scene when suddenly Scar sees Simba for the first time he comes back, and the hyenas in the background is, I thought you were dead. And the hyenas are clearly doing the because we told him you were dead, and stuff like that. And you kind of got a little bit of that from, I think, Vader's finger wagging scene. Is the, you told us you killed somebody previously who you didn't.
Yeah.
And you disintegrated them. No, you're not doing that this time.
I think the problem is the story fans wanted to get was that part of Boba Fett's character, but we're Disney now, and it's going to be on Disney Plus. And I think I don't know how much Disney is involved in like directly sanitizing these things, but if you're Jon Favreau and you want this job next year, you'll probably know that there's some limits to what you can do. Not that it wasn't still plenty brutal. They had a Rancor eat somebody, which I didn't think they would do. But it's definitely very bloodless, and I think you probably are not going to get like a disintegration scene. So maybe and then also if we're trying to tell this new story in what we're going to call now the Mandalorian time period, then you can't really go back and do that. That doesn't really help any.
But also keep in mind, Jon Favreau also directed that version of Lion King.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason it just happened to strike me, quite frankly. But one of the but my thing with it is I thought the idea of going here was very interesting. You have the showdown in the street with Cad Bane. What's going to happen with that? You have the decision points. With it, you have what is obviously the Jedi School from Episode 7.
So let's talk about that. So the sixth episode of this season, the Mandalorian goes to whatever that planet was. I don't know that we've ever even been told.
We've not been told, definitely.
Yeah, and we see some weird ant robots building a Jedi temple that looks identical to the ones we saw in The Last Jedi.
Yep.
And then we got CGI Luke, who the camera is really careful not to put too much time on his face, especially when he's talking. I understand why. and some Grogu and some world building there, and Ahsoka Tano is there also, making jokes about Luke and his dad. So really interesting intersection of characters and plot points.
And we obviously have the redemption of Anakin having occurred prior to this.
Yes, already done.
So Ahsoka can now refer to Anakin as a friendly character. Somebody who's nice in some respects.
So that episode, I don't think I liked it as much as a lot of people did. It was nothing wrong with it in terms of how it was put together, but there's little things that bothered me, like why does that temple have to look the exact same as the one we saw in Episode 8?
Well, and my reason for it is because I think it is that temple.
No, I mean the ones that were on the island, so where Luke is hiding out.
Oh, okay.
It's those Irish islands where they filmed it. All those rock, those temples made of little rocks put together. So did he go there and then build that house? And for some reason he built it to look just like the temple that just got destroyed and ruined his life? And why would he do that? So none of that narratively makes any sense to me, other than it's typical. We're going to show you the things you've seen before because we know you're going to like it because you're fans. Also with the remote, why are we still using this remote to train people? I guess it's part of the canon now.
Well, in Star Wars, it's the same way as people in Carbonite was sort of convenience. The remote was what they had.
Yeah, it just happened to be on the...
Han Solo had it.
Why would Han have a Jedi training remote? And maybe it's just like a general agility training remote of some kind that Han had just to practice target practice or dodging or whatever. But it shoots lasers. Why would a non-Jedi be able... How would a non-Jedi be able to dodge something that moves at the speed of... It doesn't make any sense. So it's just one of those things that feels out of place and just, I think it's because it was in the prequels. It's now just a part of Jedi lore, and somehow, I don't know. We're stuck with it now. I continue to not like it. Would have liked them to do anything else.
What we also saw is one of the things I thought was interesting is when Luke is running with Grogu on his back, he follows virtually the identical same actions he does when he has Yoda on his back in the scene of training there. The idea that's the pattern he does. He does the same flip. And I mean, again, I think some of that is just to identify what it is. We see this sort of it's familiar. We recognize it. Even him carrying Grogu on his back. One of the things I did think was kind of cool about the whole thing with Grogu, I have to admit, I actually didn't like Luke's interaction with Grogu.
I didn't either.
Because to me, we don't want to see Luke training people, quite frankly. I think we need Luke's inability to train Kylo Ren to remain a mystery. I think that's one of those things that we kind of need to have. We don't want to explain too much, what we have there. What I did like about it is the way they were able to do Grogu as not entirely an animated character. The scene in particular is where he's constantly lifting Grogu to keep him up. Is almost certainly him having to lift the puppet. As he's doing that. But it also looks really cool.
It is funny.
It's just funny and it's kind of cute. But the idea that Grogu is so short, he kind of needs to do this because
why can't somebody get him some pants so he can walk?
But it was one of those things where I really kind of liked that sort of thing with the stuff with the frogs. I thought was really cute, and the play off the prior stuff with the thing with the frogs. But I like that. But what we then end up with at the end is the choice.
Yes. And Grogu chose the Mandalorian, so I guess they're reunited now.
Yeah.
So we can expect that for Season 3. So there are questions at Season 2 where we thought they wrote Grogu out. Turns out, no, he's going to be back.
Yeah, now I have to admit, with it, some of that is probably because the fact that Grogu was just so dang popular.
Yeah.
The one thing I did think from it was, and what I actually liked, and I thought was an intriguing sort of thing, Grogu was too young to do it. I liked Luke making it an absolute choice.
See, what's interesting about that is we have, to me that's consistent with how the Jedi were portrayed in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Do or do not, there is no try. That's a very black and white. Look, there's the good side and the bad side. And, Luke even says, how will I know? And Yoda's like, you will know. You will know when it is time, when your mind is calm and at peace. Then we get the prequels, where we have Obi-Wan saying only a Sith believes in absolutes. Yeah. So there's this narrative incoherence that is, I think, primarily a side effect of the prequels being poorly designed and not well thought out. Yeah. But I've seen some shade thrown online about that difference between the prequels and this. But I'm like, this is more consistent with what Yoda said. Maybe the narrative arc is that it was more nuanced back in the Old Republic era, and in Yoda's time on Dagobah, he came to conclude that no, for the world to be at peace, we have to have some strict rules, some lines drawn, and that's how he's teaching Luke to kind of change the way that the Jedi work going forward.
You get a little bit of the idea of the prophecy, and the prophecy being this absolute, and the idea that there are always two, the master and the apprentice. we have these absolute rules in the Jedi in the past that we're going to get to. And one of the things I've wondered if we're setting up for this, quite frankly, is Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Because Ahsoka is not a Jedi. That's one of the real key elements of, the end of Ahsoka's animated arc is her turning away from the path of the Padawan. Cutting off her braid and walking away. And it's one of those things where, and I just spoiled stuff for Ben, but that's okay.
Fine.
But the thing that you really had from that is the idea that Ahsoka, and that's the reason she can't train Grogu, is because she's not actually a Jedi. And I'm really wondering if that's where we're going with Ahsoka's arc. Is this idea of she's not a Jedi. People may not necessarily realize she's not a Jedi, Luke included. Are we going to how Kylo Ren happens?
Oh, so you think maybe Ahsoka plays into that in some way?
I think Ahsoka is going to play into Kylo Ren's backstory. That's my take right now.
That's interesting. Are we going to get more of that somehow in Ahsoka's standalone series when it happens?
Yeah, and I think this is a setup for Ahsoka's standalone series. Again, this is my sort of take as to what it is. I think Ahsoka is going to be portrayed as a much more complex character, not her personality or anything like that, but her realm, her existence and place in the world.
Well, this also gives us some clues as to what the time frame is, because remember that she says in Mandalorian Season 2 she's looking for Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Yes.
Which means he's still alive, and so the Timothy Zahn trilogy, to the extent that it's canon, hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that Disney has said they will not overrule the Timothy Zahn trilogy. They will do nothing which makes it not canon.
Yeah, but it
is not canon. Yeah, it is not canon.
That's a good way to go about it. All right, so at the end of the day here, how do we feel about the Book of Boba Fett? Scale of 1 to 10.
This, quite frankly, I hate saying this, in things that have been recently, let's take sort of watching a lot of the animated series, Bad Batch. I've been watching Clone Wars. I've not yet watched the most recent one, Resistance, I guess it is.
Yeah,
but watching Rebels. So a number of the animated series, combining it with Visions, combining it with Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett's near the bottom.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't objectively bad. I think it was sloppily executed. It could have been better. But I think I've seen enough of Boba Fett, and I think I'm done.
Yeah, again, to me, this feels like the standalone comic outside The Mandalorian, which is the time sequence. One, I'm kind of pleased with that. Is what it is. I'm hoping means we're going to see more of Boba Fett. We're going to see this crime lord battle continue.
Yeah. If they were to do a series set in Mos Espa that was just focused on this, and not really Boba Fett specifically, that to me has some potential. Particularly if Vanth survives, which seems Kirk and I, neither one of us caught the mid-credit sequence, but apparently we see Vanth in the back of the tank in the mid-credits. So I
expected him to survive. Just how they had him be shot. Quite frankly, that was the thing with it. But the thing that I had from it, and that the way I put it, I think in conjunction with my take of Book of Boba Fett as a whole, and sort of the thing from this, I really feel like we're creating Mandalorian as a new trilogy of movies here, recognizing it's not going to be portrayed as a trilogy of movies, but we're going to use other characters to partially tell the story around this. It's going to be the ability to tell it, and in some sense what we're telling, if we look at Star Wars and say the original Star Wars trilogy was the story of R2-D2 and C-3PO, and in many respects so is the prequels. I mean, there's a lot
the consistent element that's
that, and you have R2 introduced very, very early in the prequels. He becomes kind of one of the storytellers with it. Yeah. You really have that, and even in the sequels, the last three movies, we have a consistent story arc of those people in there. They're very involved. Again, R2 and C-3PO being involved with the storyline. If we look at the movies and say they're the droid story, to me, what the Book of Boba Fett is pointing out about The Mandalorian is this is Tatooine's story.
Yeah.
This is not the story of any one person in the way that the movies are Anakin's or the Skywalker's story. This is the story of Tatooine. And Tatooine is going to be a very interesting planet because it was involved with the Skywalkers at the beginning. It's involved with them. Luke's
at the end.
And then it's involved with them at the end, that we see with it. So the idea of being, and the example to it is, if anybody happens to have read the book, I always comment about it. It's a great novel. It's definitely dated. I mean, I read it when I was in college. Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth, which is a wonderful novel. The book Pillars of the Earth is a multi-generational story about the construction of a cathedral. What you have from, it's set in like the 1400s, sort of stuff like that. You have to understand it is the cathedral story. The characters are all secondary to the cathedral. That's what I'm getting out of this, is all the characters in this are secondary to Tatooine.
Well, there's one more interesting point about Tatooine is how much of a very overt homage there is here to the subject of our last episode, Frank Herbert's Dune.
Yeah.
We've got the spice runners, the desert, the spice being,
large worms.
So those Dune elements. I don't know if the recency of Dune impacted the setting here or whatever, but there's clearly something about the Tatooine setting that is important to Disney in terms of this property, and so it's being prominently featured here.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my take from it. I'm quite frankly looking forward a little more to the Ahsoka story now, because I think Ahsoka looked a little more interesting in this one than she was in her original portrayal in The Mandalorian.
I haven't seen anything on that, although I did see a couple of sort of digital posters for the Obi-Wan series, which I guess we're going to have it in May.
Well, and that occurred when they did some of the stuff for the Disney Plus Day, I guess, and they did that, the 1 year anniversary of it. They definitely did some preview.
Interesting to see when that is set. I'm going to guess that also Tatooine.
It's going to be set on Tatooine. I think we're going to see it as it's going to be what I think we're in some sense going to see is Luke growing up, but I think it's going to be Luke he's not going to be a major character. It's going to be something occurring in the background.
I suspect what they're going to do is, because one of the questions we always ask is, how is it that the guy named Luke Skywalker, famously named after the most famous guy ever, has somehow gone undetected on Tatooine? We've speculated it's because, one, Tatooine is that remote, and that all the crime there makes it easy to disappear there. I wonder if the Obi-Wan story will be largely about him keeping that secret.
Yes, I think that's what we're going to see, is Obi-Wan essentially continue. It's him very aggressively hiding Luke.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we may get some hints, because of just timing-wise, of where the Mandalorian is going to be going with the crime families that are all set up in Book of Boba Fett.
Yep.
Again, the Mandalorian time. Every time I do this, by the way, I keep doing like circles with my hands of the Mandalorian time period.
You guys can't see Kirk's gestures, but you can probably hear them.
So that's the thing that I think we've got with that. Quite frankly, that would be an interesting story. It could be a very interesting story. We've obviously introduced much more about assassins, bounty hunters.
Yeah, there's a lot of background here to build off of.
We can definitely have Anakin hunting his son. I mean, that's something that's not a weird idea as Darth Vader, that him knowing that he has children and him hunting them.
Didn't they announce that Hayden Christensen's been recast to reprise his role?
Yes.
As Anakin, I think, in the Vader suit.
In the Vader suit.
So maybe that's going to play into the Obi-Wan series. Maybe that's what it is. Part of it is Vader being thinking Tatooine's important, being drawn there for some reason, and having to be continually pushed off. So
also, quite frankly, one thing that I keep wondering about, and I have to wonder about this, people who may know the Star Wars it's sort of expanded universe much better than me. Is there something about Tatooine in the far past or in the far future
they
outside
allude to
of
that.
this?
Remember, they mentioned Tatooine used to be covered in oceans, and now it's a desert planet. So, was it a geological thing?
I have an alternative idea.
What's that?
Is it Camino?
Oh. Well, how could it be, though? Because, Camino
is way out in the Outer Rim.
But Camino is covered in oceans, at the time of the Bad Batch, which is shortly after Episode 3. How does Tatooine turn into deserts in, less than a generation?
The Empire can do destructive things,
I suppose.
But we do have, the thing about it is we do have Tatooine actually being, earlier in it. It's a great theory, but technically Tatooine appears in the prequels, so it can't be.
Yeah, the timing I guess doesn't work, but
but I wonder it is too. Are they setting something up? The idea that Tatooine is a vastly more important planet in the scale of the Star Wars expanded universe that's ever been. And again, I don't know, if we go to the First Republic, and we go to, these series that are set 1,000 years in front of Star Wars, or, they haven't really done either that late after, but, I know there's Star Wars series that are set thousands of years in front of the movies. Is Tatooine something important there, as to what it is? Those are the kind of plays I've had. I've wondered about, is there something in that expanded universe they want to get to? Or if it's not in the expanded universe yet, that they're actually looking to go to.
Yeah.
The idea that Tatooine is a more important player. And it's just because I think there is that idea, and I've seen a lot of science fiction, as you know I play, Warhammer 40K. If you guys are into the lore of Warhammer 40K, Armageddon has always been a huge planet in the story of Warhammer 40K. And then they introduced the fact that Armageddon used to be known by another name in the Beast Arises series of books, which was one of the major sort of plot advancing things from 10,000 years earlier. And the idea that Armageddon is the same world. And so suddenly that's the reason why everybody is fighting over it, is because this world has vastly more importance than anybody understands. And now you have the question of, is that going to play into the future as we're advancing the timeline? This world has vastly more importance than people understand. Are we doing that with Tatooine?
Time will tell.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up, partially because we have another meeting starting in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway, our next episode, we're still going to do a revisit of our culture and IP topic, dealing with some of these new laws that are coming out to address some of the things that we mentioned in the episode, the Rewind episode we just played. But first, we got somebody reached out to us on Facebook and asked if we could talk about IP issues surrounding things like Twitch, live streaming video games. We haven't really talked about that, and we would like to, so we are going to.
Yeah, I think Twitch in particular has become so much more prominent now. I mean, it's interesting because Twitch has not entered, I don't think, mainstream culture, but as a name, but everybody knows what it is.
Yeah, everybody knows what it is.
You know, and I think it's kind of an intriguing sort of thing.
Yep. So anyway, that'll be coming up next. We don't know exactly when on timing, but we're trying to get one episode of us together out each month. We've already gotten it in for February, so that's yay, go us. But we kind of record these as time and resources allow. So that one will be hopefully out within the next 4 weeks, maybe sooner, maybe later. Just depends on how things go. Anyway, that's all for this time. We'll see you next time. Lauren, play us out.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded in St. Louis, Missouri.